The air was thick with tension as the sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Custer's mind raced, fueled by the urgency of the moment. Reports of native warriors spotted nearby weighed heavily on his conscience. As he stood among his men, he understood the stakes of the day. They were not just marching into a battle. They were entering a realm fraught with danger. His thoughts whirled with strategies and contingencies, each plan more intricate than the last. It was clear they needed to be cautious, for the unfamiliar terrain could easily hide an ambush. In the midst of this chaos, Custer's attention turned to Reno. He briefed him quickly, his voice sharp and clear. Dispatch scouts ahead with Lieutenant Hare for reconnaissance. This was no ordinary mission. It was a calculated risk, and every decision counted. Custer had already given similar orders to Benteen and was now doing the same with men from Yates' company. His instincts screamed for vigilance, a warning that would not be ignored. As Reno took charge, the column pressed forward. The sound of hooves thudding against the earth created a rhythmic backdrop to the unfolding drama. The soldiers crossed a small knoll, and Reno made a sharp left, leading his men as they recrossed the narrow stream. There was a sense of purpose among the troops, a shared understanding that they were on the brink of something monumental. The dry creek bed lay before them like a narrow ribbon, guiding them toward their destination. Reno slowed the column as they approached the river, the tension palpable in the air. "Tighten the ranks," he barked, the command echoing among the men. The urgency of the moment demanded focus. They could not afford to falter now. Crossing the river at what is now known as Ford A, Reno briefly regrouped his men, their faces etched with determination. However, a sense of disarray lingered in the air. There was disagreement among the ranks about whether a complete stop had occurred. Some soldiers recalled a brief pause, while others argued they had never fully halted. This confusion was understandable, given the circumstances. Reno had shifted from a column of fours to a column of twos, resulting in congestion and the inherent chaos of a moving battalion. As the horses entered the frigid waters, their instincts kicked in. Some paused to drink, lapping at the water, while others pushed ahead, jostling for position, their breaths forming clouds in the cool air. Commands rang out amid the din. "Keep moving, no stopping." The urgency in Reno's voice resonated as the horses struggled to climb the slippery bank. The ground was treacherous, and the last thing they needed was to lose momentum. A few troopers dismounted momentarily to adjust their gear, their hands fumbling with saddlebags and canteens. The quick, frantic movements underscored the reality of their situation. Yet, even as the river crossed behind them, the column would not be deterred. Reno reformed his men into a column of fours and pressed onward through the thick timber, the Little Bighorn Valley looming ahead. Time was against them. Every second counted as they ventured deeper into enemy territory. Orders crackled through the air like electricity. Messengers dispatched even as the column maintained its pace. The soldiers felt the weight of history resting upon their shoulders. They knew they were part of something larger, a moment that would echo through time. But would they emerge victorious or succumb to the chaos of war? As Reno led his men onward, he barely paused to regroup. His battalion. The time was roughly 1:15 p.m., tight and unforgiving, and the orders were as clear as the blue sky above. No stopping, no resting, and certainly no drinking water. Speed was critical, and the soldiers were aware that the eyes of fate were upon them. Reno sent word back to Custer twice, his messages imbued with urgency. "The native forces are advancing," he reported, breathless with the gravity of his findings. "They're not retreating, they're preparing to engage." His words carried weight, emphasizing the sheer number of warriors they were about to face and the readiness of the enemy. This account, consistent across various testimonies from both Reno's supporters and detractors, held a credibility that could not be ignored. Captain Miles Moylan, a close ally of Custer, later testified in 1879, reinforcing Reno's assertion that there was little to no delay in moving into the valley after receiving orders. The accounts of the day were being woven into the fabric of history, each voice contributing to the narrative that would be told for generations. Benny Hodgson, a soldier who shared the tense moments with Reno, relayed crucial information to Moylan. Hodgson had believed that the native forces would be in retreat and that Custer's command would provide the necessary support. As he described the unfolding events, Moylan confirmed that while Custer's flank attack was meant to serve as a diversion, it would also act to draw native forces away from Reno's men. The stakes were rising, and the anticipation hung heavy in the air. Ironically, Hodgson, who was killed shortly after conveying this message, had little incentive to alter the facts. Moylan recalled with a somber tone that Reno ordered the battalion to trot and cross the river without significant delay, a fact backed up by the positioning of the companies within the column. As they forged deeper into the valley, a palpable tension enveloped the battalion. Every soldier felt the gravity of the situation, the anticipation of the conflict that lay ahead gnawing at their resolve. The trees loomed overhead, casting eerie shadows as the men moved through the timber. The landscape was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the unmistakable heartbeat of an army marching into the unknown. Reno, ever the cautious leader, felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Each decision he made could mean the difference between life and death for his men. As they approached a clearing, he signaled for the column to slow. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every soldier's gaze was fixed ahead, searching for signs of movement, any indication of the native forces. Suddenly, a piercing war cry shattered the stillness of the valley, echoing off the hills like a thunderclap. Reno's heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins as he instinctively tightened his grip on the reins. "Prepare for contact," he shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. The soldiers fell into formation, their breaths coming in quick bursts as they readied themselves for the impending clash. The native warriors emerged from the trees like phantoms, fierce and determined, their presence striking fear into the hearts of the troopers. The two sides met in a flurry of motion. Arrows soared through the air, the sounds of gunfire erupted, and the chaos of battle descended upon the valley. Reno's mind raced as he strategized amidst the turmoil. He could see the numbers of the enemy, their fierce expressions fueled by a sense of purpose. This was not merely a skirmish. It was a clash of cultures, a confrontation rooted in deep-seated tensions and historical grievances. Reno called out commands, urging his men to hold their positions, but the tide of battle surged unpredictably. As the fight unfolded, the battalion faced mounting pressure. The realization set in. They were outnumbered, and the determination of the native forces was unwavering. In the midst of the fray, soldiers fell, their bodies collapsing into the earth, a grim reminder of the stakes they faced. Reno's heart ached for his men, for the friendships forged in the fires of camaraderie, now threatened by the violence of war. Yet within the chaos, moments of bravery shone through. Troopers rallied around their fallen comrades, unwilling to let fear dictate their actions. Each man fought not only for his life, but for the legacy of those who had come before. The history of their struggles intertwined with the present, creating a tapestry of sacrifice and valor. Just when the battle seemed to reach its apex, a sudden shift occurred. Custer's flank attack, intended as a diversion, took on a new significance. The cries of warriors echoed through the valley, merging with the sounds of gunfire as Custer's forces engaged from the side. It was a calculated risk that brought the conflict to a boiling point. Reno, amidst the chaos, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the moment they would turn the tide. But as he looked around, the scene was one of disarray. The men struggled to maintain formation, and the enemy pressed forward, their resolve unyielding. Reno's instincts told him they needed to regroup, to find their footing in the madness. "Fall back," he commanded, his voice cutting through the din. "Reform the lines." The soldiers responded, struggling against the tide of chaos as they attempted to regroup. The intensity of the battle swirled around them, a whirlwind of conflict that threatened to engulf them. In those critical moments, time felt both fleeting and eternal. Each second stretched into infinity as they fought to regain control. The landscape became a blur, a chaotic dance of men and horses, gunfire and war cries mingling in a cacophony of sound. But amidst the madness, Reno held on to hope, believing that the tide could still turn in their favor. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield, the outcome remained uncertain. Would they emerge victorious? Or would this day mark a tragic chapter in history? The answer lay in the resolve of each soldier, in the bonds forged amidst the chaos. In that moment, they were not just soldiers. They were a brotherhood, united against the storm that threatened to consume them all. In the aftermath of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the testimonies of those who survived began to weave a complex tapestry of events, each thread revealing a different perspective. Among them was Edward Matthey, a soldier who, despite his personal disdain for Reno, found himself corroborating Reno's version of events. His feelings toward Reno were complicated, marred by the stress of battle and the shifting tides of allegiance that defined their camaraderie. A year after the fateful day, Matthey recalled a conversation with a fellow soldier, Derudio, who remarked with scorn, "If we hadn't been commanded by a coward, we would have been killed." This biting sentiment echoed the frustration of many who had been caught in the whirlwind of the day, struggling to reconcile their experiences with the leadership that had brought them to such peril. Despite his animosity toward Reno, Matthey's testimony aligned with that of his superior officer. He noted that Reno was the first to enter the stream, his figure cutting through the water like a determined soldier charging into battle. Upon clearing the dense timber, Reno wasted no time, swiftly forming his men into battle lines, a clear indication of his intention to prepare for the fight ahead. The scene was chaotic, yet there was a semblance of order as the soldiers braced themselves for what was to come. Sergeant Ferdinand Culbertson, who witnessed the events unfold, testified that Reno's battalion left Custer approximately 3/4 of a mile from the banks of the Little Bighorn River. They set off at a brisk trot, the urgency of the situation evident in their movements. The ground beneath them echoed with the thunderous sound of hooves, a cacophony that mirrored the beating hearts of the men who rode into the fray. James Wilbur, a trooper from Company M, provided further insight into the rapid pace of their advance. He was part of the advance scouts assigned to Sergeant White and had received orders to follow Lieutenant Hare. The urgency in their actions reflected the precarious nature of their mission. As they approached the river, a shout from Cook broke through, the din urging them to slow down. "Don't tire your horses. We'll need them soon," the trooper cautioned, his voice carrying a weight of foresight. The command rang clear, but the soldiers were already caught in the tide of adrenaline, their bodies moving as one toward the impending confrontation. Culbertson confirmed that there was a brief delay to allow the column to close ranks, a necessary pause in the fevered rush of battle. This moment of hesitation, however fleeting, underscored the challenges they faced. As French rode just behind Reno, he instructed Sergeant Miles O'Hara to ensure the formation stayed tight. O'Hara, resolute in his duty, even stood in the cold water, his presence a firm reminder to the men that stopping was not an option. Yet, Private William Morris, driven by instinct and the thirst of his horse, disregarded O'Hara's commands, allowing his steed to drink deeply from the river. In doing so, Morris contradicted the very narrative he later claimed, that the column had not stopped. His actions revealed the chaos that war can bring, where instinct often overrides order. Dr. Porter, observing the unfolding events with the keen eye of a seasoned soldier, provided more evidence regarding the speed at which Reno's command moved. He estimated that it took them only 10 to 15 minutes to reach the ford after receiving their orders, and another 5 to 10 minutes to cross the river. This rapid transit was a testament to the urgency of their mission and the discipline of the men who followed Reno into the heart of danger. George Herendine, another soldier who found himself swept up in the whirlwind of events, recounted his experience in a statement given in 1878. He affirmed that Reno began his charge toward the river at a gallop, his horse racing forward as adrenaline coursed through their veins. Herendine, in his recollections, detailed how he caught up with Reno after his own horse stumbled and fell, a moment that brought the chaos of battle into sharp focus. As they crossed the river, the urgency of the situation was heightened by the warnings of the Crow Scouts. Their voices rang out, frantic and desperate, shouting alerts about the Sioux approaching. Herondine quickly relayed this vital information to Reno, a sentiment echoed by Gerard, who had conveyed similar warnings to Cook. The gravity of their situation was becoming clear, and the soldiers steeled themselves for the confrontation that awaited them. Despite the rapid pace at which they moved, Reno's route was anything but smooth. The landscape transformed from familiar terrain into a battleground fraught with uncertainty. The river, once a clear and inviting passage, became a treacherous obstacle, its banks slippery and unforgiving. As the soldiers pressed on, the cold water splashed against their legs, a stark reminder of the elements they faced. Each step felt laden with weight, not only from their gear, but also from the looming specter of battle. The tension in the air thickened as Reno and his men continued their advance. They pushed forward, determination etched on their faces, yet the undercurrent of fear ran deep. The landscape was alive with danger, and every rustle of leaves or distant cry sent ripples of anxiety through the ranks. Reno knew that every second counted, and the urgency of their movements reflected the stakes at hand. They were charging into the unknown, the fate of their battalion resting on the edge of a knife. As they neared the riverbank, the soldiers began to form a line, the weight of their rifles a tangible reminder of their purpose. The call to arms resonated within each of them, a clarion call that stirred their spirits. But the path was fraught with peril. The brush ahead concealed potential threats, and the looming fear of ambush hung heavily in the air. Amidst the turmoil, the camaraderie of the soldiers shone through. Each man was acutely aware of the stakes, of the lives that depended on their bravery and unity. The bonds forged in the fires of training and shared hardships propelled them forward, even as the odds stacked against them began to mount. As Reno and his men continued to move through the treacherous terrain, the landscape around them began to shift. The trees closed in, casting eerie shadows that danced in the fading light. The once clear sound of rushing water transformed into an ominous silence, broken only by the distant murmurs of the enemy. The air felt electric, charged with the anticipation of what was to come. In those final moments before the inevitable clash, Reno's heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. The thoughts of his men, their lives resting in his hands, fueled his resolve. He could not falter. He had to lead them into the fray. The cacophony of war was closing in, and the time for action was upon them. As the men prepared for the battle that lay ahead, Reno's thoughts turned to the reports he had received. The Sioux forces were well prepared and numerous, a formidable opponent that would not be easily subdued. But he had to believe in his men, in the training and the dedication that had brought them this far.